So the whole reason that I bothered to explain parallax is to explain what seems to be this great truth of life that I've learned. It's become obvious to me because of things that have happened in my own life, but I'm not going to take credit for any of the ideas. I just sort of organized a lot of ideas into this one way of thinking about life. So just bear with me, especially if you're not a scientist. So imagine this X is you, right? This is you in the present. This is you today. And there's the past, and there's the future. And so time is going this way, right? This is your past, and this is your future. And actually, you already know what happened in your past, and if you had sort of a weird past, things didn't really make sense, maybe rather than just saying it's this thin line, you could say it could happen anywhere, sort of in this area. So we're breaking out a little bit into this other direction that would be going out here. You know, maybe if you just want to draw an analog to something you're more familiar with, this is the Y direction and this is the X direction. And you look at your future, and given most of the people I know, you have most people I would say, well, a lot of people in America, although a very small fraction of people in the rest of the world, have some idea of what their future looks like, even way down the road. So I'm going to call those boundary conditions. And what it basically means is most of us imagine that, for instance, we imagine our future, and even if we imagine living in maybe any city, or getting married or not getting married, or maybe having one or having 3 children, or some basic type of career. You know, we imagine having what we would consider sort of a real career, or maybe you're imagining the future of odd jobs. You still, your future is sort of in this general area. And so there are these boundary conditions explaining, basically, setting the things that you would imagine can happen to you in the future. And even if people say they're open-minded about it, they really do have some boundary conditions. So back to you in the present. You've got some things floating around here in this little plane of existence. You've got maybe some of your best friends. You've got school. I'm a graduate student, so school is a big thing for me. Maybe you've got your job, and you have these perspectives on them that go with a pen that doesn't work at all. So rather, you've got perspectives, you know, and you have a certain way of understanding your relationship with those friends, and you have a certain way of understanding yourself with relationship to friends or school or your job. And it really helps you, you've situated yourself in your understanding of the rest of the world. And if you look back on the past, you have past you, and obviously you look back and you have a way of understanding yourself with respect to past you, and the farther you go through time, because time is increasing this way, the longer this distance gets, maybe you get more perspective. So this is all a beautiful story, but sometimes things happen. For me, it was having basically a psychological breakdown and having to drop out of college my first year. So I had all these beautifully determined relationships. Actually, they were terrible, but that helped me understand the world. And then rather than going forward and remaining inside these boundary conditions, all of a sudden, I was moved out here. This was very problematic. So this is really me being very far away from school. I thought, oh my God, you know, I don't understand what's going on. Certainly when I thought that maybe I wasn't going to finish college, my future was totally different. I had always assumed that I would go to college. Um, and so these boundary conditions were no good anymore. Then I began to look at the other things around me. I began to look at my friends, and I realized that I had this other perspective on them. You know, my friends looked different. Maybe I realized I was more like them than I thought I was. Maybe I realized I was less like them than I thought I was. Certainly my relationship to things like school changed. All of a sudden, rather than it being my friend, you know, a place that I did well and that I understood, it was this terrible place that I don't understand, that I'm failing and that I fail from. And if I think about maybe a job, you know, well, I didn't have a job at the time, but you know, a similar thing with the relationship to school. But I think even more interestingly, well, so immediately I began to think about all of these things and sort of re-establish my situation in this like abruptly new position. But then, you know, it's interesting because I could look at my past, and even though for many years I had, you know, been understanding my past in a certain way. So again, this is me one day, and this is me the next after something crazy has happened. So even though I can understand my past in a certain way, and I can understand who I was in relationships to these things, all of a sudden now I have this other perspective, and I can evaluate my original perspective. And in fact, I can compare them. And you know, I was just talking about parallax in a previous video, but now all of a sudden I have parallax, right? Because I've been moved to a different position, and I knew where I was before, and I've begun to understand where I am in the new position, and so I can use these two positions to think about my past, or I can use these two positions or perspectives to think about the future that I was thinking about having. And a lot of people find this overwhelming, and there's a sense of disorientation, because usually the things that induce this sort of change to happen are things that undermine your values about the world, undermine the things you think you knew about yourself, and so there's a sense of disorientation, maybe a little bit confusion about an identity, and certainly your plans for the future and why you do things are all screwed up, and a lot of people get really frustrated, and maybe they even become nihilistic about things. They say, you know what, none of this means anything, F it. But if you are in any of a bunch of existentialist stories where someone has something terrible happen to them, or something that really changes their perspectives of themselves, and they experience this disorientation. At first it's very confusing, and they wonder what the meaning of everything is, but then something happens. Something that allows them to say yes to nihilism, which I don't like, and that's another topic for another day. But basically, they begin to become oriented, and then they realize that rather than defining their future and how they care about things as being this terrible obligation, so it's actually not that. It's a wonderful opportunity. And it's a great source of freedom. It's one of the wonderful things about being a human, and being able to think about who you are and have some self-awareness, and then think about what happens when you change. So this is one of my sort of basic ideas about life. And frankly, this doesn't happen to everybody. Like I said, this happened to me when I had a psychological breakdown and had to drop out of college. This happened to a friend when we got in a horrible car accident, and he was momentarily, he had a loss of mobility, and even though he had been working on particle physics, even though he had been working on particle physics at CERN, at the LHC in Geneva for a couple of years, all of a sudden he was stuck in his parents' basement in Philadelphia. And initially he wasn't sure if he was going to walk again, and he never knew if he was going to walk easily again. And he certainly wasn't on the clear path of finishing his PhD and having his wonderful life in Europe for those 6 months. He did a lot of thinking, and he was able to do this sort of thing too. So the moral of the story is that it's this very, there's this very trite sentiment, cliched sentiment, that when something really terrible happens, you gain perspective and it's better. But really, I think there's a pretty systematic way to understand it. One of the funnier things about getting older and progressing about this line is that you're more likely to have this sort of thing happen, and then you realize that there's a reason why old people were saying it. But at any rate, that's as much as I'm going to say about this. I'm going to draw some more on this drawing in a moment and relate it to some physical ideas for physical scientists that are made more comfortable rather than less comfortable by the discussion of physics.